So today I want to share some tips on how to take better photos of cars. Now, whether you want to shoot at a racetrack or just go out and have some fun, these tips should be helpful. Of course, I'm not just expecting you to take my word for it, so here's some photos I've taken, and you can decide yourself whether you want to listen to me or not. Okay, so to start off, let's get the gear out of the way. Now, I know, especially if you want to shoot races, it can be quite intimidating because you see the guys with the 400 mils or 600 mils, and you probably don't have access to one of those because they're really fucking expensive. But you really don't need one. Now, there's situations where having a 400 or 600 might be helpful, but mostly they're just to get some really close-up shots of cars. And personally, at least, I find that that's not even the best looking all the time. So I love to shoot with just a 24-70 and a 70-200. I find that with those two lenses, you can really shoot just about anything. If you can only afford one, go for the 24-70. It's actually surprisingly versatile, even at a racetrack. You can get pretty close sometimes, like really close. So you don't even need that really, really long reach unless you want to shoot at specific corners or whatever. So yeah, even if you're shooting on random streets, having the versatility of a 24-70 can be really nice because you might not always have location permits or whatever. And so you might not want to take too much time there. I also find that I don't really need anything wider than a 2.8 usually, so that works out pretty much fine. And yeah, especially, I mean, this RF 24-70 is just really sharp, so there's no point in switching lenses all the time, really. Anyway, all that to say, you really do not need to obsess over getting like a $10,000 600 mil because you just don't need them, actually, in my opinion. Yeah, they're nice to have, but the 24-70 and 70-200 will allow you to shoot pretty much anything you really want to shoot, I guess. And yeah, I mean, they're still expensive, but a lot more affordable at least. Okay, so number 2 is filters. And I'm gonna get the obvious one out of the way now. Pretty much any video on car photography is probably gonna tell you to get a polarizer. And that is because they're actually quite important. Cars are giant mirrors, and with that you can cut out some of the reflections. Now, do you absolutely need one? No, it's fine if you shoot without one. But having one definitely can elevate your shots a bit. As for the second filter I like to use, and this one is, I think, a bit more unconventional for shooting cars, but they've gotten really popular over the past few years, it's a Pro Mist. I like to stack the Pro Mist and the CPL because I find that, especially for rolling shots, it looks pretty nice with the light rolling over the hood of the car and the roof of the car, and it just, I don't know, it just adds a bit of a shine on them. So the next thing is your shutter speed. When you're shooting cars, when you want to get those nice rolling shots, I like to stick between 1/15th and a 50th of a second. You're gonna really have to experiment with that a bit, depending on like how fast the car is going and how close you are to it. But yeah, usually 1/15 to 1/50th really helps. And what it also does, besides just looking cool in general, is if you're shooting in a location that isn't all that nice looking, especially around a racetrack, there's often corners that just don't look great. If you're just going out to shoot, you hopefully chose a nice location anyway, but it kind of hides that ugly location a bit. And yeah, it really helps with that as well. So 1/15th to 1/50th is a pretty good range. As far as lighting goes, even if you are just shooting with natural light, it's pretty important how you actually position the car. So what I find looks best is backlight or side light. You don't really want to have like direct front light on the car ever. It just does not look that nice. Even if the sun is still pretty high up, if you position it behind the car, it's still gonna look pretty nice usually, especially if you combine it with that slow shutter speed. because what that does as well is it allows the light to just wrap over the car a bit more. So yeah, you can actually get some pretty nice shots even at like high noon, but like with any other form of photography, probably isn't what you're gonna want to do. So for the last point, editing. This is one of those things that even if you listen to me talking about it now, it's just not gonna improve overnight. It really is gonna take some time to figure out how to properly edit stuff. So if you're just starting out, it might take a couple of years actually until you're really, really happy with what you're doing. But there are some things that, especially in car photography, I see a lot, and that is that HDR effect. I don't know why that's still around, but a lot of people still edit like this. I mean, I did when I started out, so can't blame anyone for doing it, but you really want to be careful with how much you pull and push your shadows and highlights, because that's really what gives you that effect. So before you really just push those sliders to 100, it's totally fine if you're just clipping your highlights or shadows a bit. It really is. It's 100 times better than just looking at it and it has that 2005 HDR look. It just doesn't look great. The last thing that I see added to this a lot is clarity. Clarity can look pretty nice on cars, but it doesn't usually look too nice on everything around it. So if you overdo that, it's pretty bad usually. But one thing you can do is just mask the car. It really doesn't take that much time and it's gonna really improve your shots a lot. The last tip I have is if you have the luxury of choosing the color of the car you're shooting, don't go with black. I know that if you have the choice between like a silver and the black, you're probably gonna think the black one's gonna look cooler, but they're way harder to shoot. Keeping shadow detail in a black car is actually really difficult sometimes. So you're gonna have to pay a lot more attention to how you're exposing while you're shooting. And in general, it just makes it trickier to get any details out of the car. So if you have the choice, don't go with the black one. So yeah, that's pretty much all I've got. Honestly, just spend some time editing and playing around with that. That is really gonna help you. Gear matters a lot less than you think it does, because honestly, whether you're shooting with this really expensive RF 2470 or an 18-55 kit lens, especially when I take those rolling shots, which I find look the coolest anyway, I close down my aperture so much that it really doesn't matter. So just go out, shoot some photos, buy a CPL probably, and spend some time editing.